the premiere of Reasons Why Aliens Will Never Invade Earth. It's our first podcast. It's a podcast with a funny name, but with serious subject matter. And I was on earlier today, if you logged in, and it was about what was going on around there, but this is totally different. We're going to have an expert today. His name is Quincy Ruffin, and he is a implicit bias expert. So what is implicit bias? Well, we're going to bring in Mr. Ruffin. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. How's it going?
Good. How are you? So would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
I am a father, police sergeant, and I am a writer and speaker. I specialize in implicit bias, diversity, and inclusion, and I published several articles on those subjects on Unmasking the Biosphere. And I consult with a company called Gridiron Training with my good friend Don Jewell, friend and mentor, and William Duke.
So what is exactly implicit bias?
It's interesting. Implicit bias is one of the most, in my mind, most misunderstood subjects, and it's something that we deal with so much right now. Essentially, it's the unconscious attitudes and beliefs that we have that shape the way we interact with other people. And we get those attitudes and those ideas from parents, from the media, from our own experiences. But it's implicit. It's down deep.
Okay.
It's not a conscious.
So I mean, you and I talked before, and it's deeper than just I'm a racist. I mean, you may not know that you have implicit bias, and some of the tells are things that you may not even realize you're doing. Can you explain some of those tells that could imply that you are, in fact, implicitly biased towards a certain person? It's typically race that you're being biased towards, correct?
Well, it's a lot of things. It's basically an adaptation that we have. Scientists believe that the conscious mind can process about 40 frames of information per second. But in that same second, the subconscious brain will process 1.4 million. So who's in charge? It's the subconscious brain. Our brains are constantly matching things up. If I gave you a deck of cards and you're gonna match those deck of cards up, you can match with red really easily. Visually, it's quick, it's automatic because we've done it so much. But to match up, the ones with the kings and the jacks with the twos, that sort of thing, that's going to take a little bit more time because visual processing and everything, we don't have that matched up as easily. So it's going to take more time to do it. And so that's the idea behind implicit bias. It's harder to match things up that we haven't already matched up in the past. So we see certain things, and essentially with race, we have this Black crime association where we attach Black people with criminal activity and criminal items.
So, I mean, how do I know? I mean, will I really know if I'm implicitly biased, or can I be in denial that I have this implicit bias, or is it pretty much inherent in everything I do? And I mean, do I have implicit bias towards cereal, or is it implicit bias towards a person or a race?
That's going to be typically towards people, right? I have an example of a bias that I've had. I used to work over at a local university, and when talking to a woman who was in a wheelchair, she had physical differences, and like I said, in the wheelchair, talking to her, taking information from her, I started to speak to her in a more sort of like slowly, speak louder to her. And she was offended by that. Of course, she kind of read me the riot act on it because I assumed that because she had physical difficulties there, that there were going to be mental and audio difficulties as well. And of course, that was wrong. But that was a bias that I had, is that because she had physical differences, there were going to be cognitive differences as well. And so I had matched that up because my experience had been that they were connected in some way. And so that's kind of how those implicit biases work. I didn't have a particular problem with this woman or the fact that she was in the wheelchair, but I treated her differently, inadvertently, just because of that, because of what I saw.
So did you tell the people what your other job is, or did you what you normally do on a day to day. Did you mention that in your opening?
Yes, I'm a police sergeant in a local agency.
Okay, so you interact with people on a regular basis,
Right.
and it's you as an officer. It's your job to try to not to approach something with a level of thought pattern from the very beginning. You have to wipe your mind out completely when you approach this person.
Well, you do and you don't, right? I mean, if you're in a law enforcement, a first responder job, you're having to deal with situations that are rapidly evolving, unpredictable, and you really don't know what people are going to do. So those situations can be quite stressful, and you have to make decisions that are quick decisions. I have this theory of cultural content, of cultural current, which says that essentially every culture has a current, a direction where things go.
Okay.
And in our culture, when you look at the U.S., we've had blacks in the U.S. have been slaves for longer than we've been free.
Okay.
And so the cultural current goes towards that direction. Again, with this race crime connection that we have, it's hard not to look at certain people and think right away that they're a danger. So of course you've seen all the high profile shootings and
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so we've got all this going on, and people are looking to weed out the racist cops and that sort of thing. But the big problem that we have is that we're not facing the implicit bias that people have that they're not aware of.
So is there a correlation between the police shootings in the areas that, where we have them at, where we've had the major ones that have gone down? Is there a correlation with the implicit bias and the shootings?
So if you look at there's something called the implicit association test. Mahzarin Banaji over at Harvard, created this, and with her team created this test that essentially uses the idea that we match things up so perfectly, so constantly. She used that test to say, okay, what biases do you have? Or do you match up female with caretaker? Do you match up male with, things like doctor, that sort of thing? And so with that, she could look at, are you matching up white with good and black with bad? And how fast does it take you to do it the opposite way? And so it wasn't officers that were taking these tests as much as actually mostly citizens. And so what they did was they looked at the zip codes that had the highest number of the highest implicit biases. And
okay. Oh, we lost him for a second. Hold on. So technology is what it is, and he's there. We're going to try to have him back in a second. He dropped out, but are you back?
I can't tell. Can you see me?
I see you. Go ahead.
So they found a correlation between not just the individual officers and the biases that they had, but the actual community. The areas that had the highest biases with the community showed the highest numbers of police and officer involved shootings of minorities. Now, these were justified. They would call it justified homicides. They were justified, but there was a higher number, and there was definitely a correlation. So they're connected, but it's more like the officers are reacting off of the flow of the actual community.
Well, so now this brings me to a whole new level of something. So in California, California is the state where, they legislate a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Every time if somebody drops a bottle of water on their foot, they'll pass a bill saying that you shouldn't pass a bottle on your foot because it may injure you.
Right.
So California now has, I don't know the number of AB something, I got to look it up again, but they want to make it so that officers have to get not implicit bias training, but they have to be tested for implicit biases before they can even get hired. And I would think that, you being a police officer, you'd be like, yes, let's do it. But what do you think about it?
So I think you're talking about Assembly Bill 846 that was written by Autumn Burke, and it says that Post will make a requirement that, and I'll actually read from the direct Assembly Bill. It was from the author that the minimum standard for each police officer will be amended in order to require that each individual must be free from explicit and implicit bias when evaluating their mental condition through their training and examination. So what we know about implicit bias is that it's pervasive. We all have implicit biases. So in order to have that kind of standard, you would have to be able to get rid of all implicit biases. You cannot do that. And so the question I have about a bill like that is, where's that information going to go? How is it going to be used? And what happens when everybody gets tested and we find out that everyone has implicit biases?
So could it be used for litigation if you go through the training and that says that this officer, before he was hired, he did not show any implicit bias, but yet his actions say differently. So now we're going to sue because, we had one thing, but we're getting something different?
Well, that's part of the question I have about it. If we all have implicit biases, who's going to get through that process in the first place? We'll end up with no officers, really. I mean, because everyone has implicit biases. But let's say they somehow amend it and they say, yes, okay, if you get through, if you have this amount of implicit bias, we'll let you through.
Okay.
We'll let you through. And then you get hired on. 2 years later, we find out, you get into a shooting and you shoot somebody with purple hair, and your test showed that you had an issue with people with purple hair. Could that come out? Who knows? I mean, we can't say right now how they're going to use that information. Of course, are my psych records available to the public after I'm an officer, for 2 years? That's a good question. And so right now we haven't, that hasn't really come up, but it's something that's fairly new. And I think there's some more work that should be done on this particular bill.
Has any officers been tested now for implicit bias, or it's still so much? I mean, it's a hot button issue. Let's be true about this. And with all the police shootings and all the things that are going on right now in society, is there a test right now that can be taken to determine if you are implicitly biased? And if there is a test, the question would be, where would this test be located, and can any person take it, or just law enforcement?
There is a test. So I'll split that into two questions. So there's a test that you can take regarding implicit bias, and you can go on to the implicit association test on the Harvard website. But it's not something that officers are forced to take right now. But there is a psych exam that officers take and a polygraph in some agencies. So those tests are testing for those explicit biases. If you start testing for implicit biases, again, these are not things that officers are necessarily going to know about themselves or self-report. So if you want to actually take the implicit association, it's implicit.harvard.edu, I think it is, to remember. What the test is.
So let's go backwards for a minute. Let's get away from the props. I may come back there in a minute. So there are days when I go online, I'm like, you know what? I'm in the elevator, I'm minding my business. Mm-hmm. This lady gets on, she clutches her purse really tight, and I'm thinking, what did I do to make her think that I'm going to do anything to her? Another example is I was in a Trader Joe's in Newport Beach, and the lady had her purse in the cart, and I turned the aisle. She saw me turn the aisle. She ran to her cart to grab her purse, and then she clutched it. Is that the same thing, or is that just a different level altogether?
It's so she may have actually believed that something was going to happen, that you were going to take her purse. Now, whether it's explicit or implicit, it's hard to tell, because she may, if you talk to her, say, yeah, you know what? Black people steal purses. They attack you. Or she may go, that's that guy, Stan Roberts. I know him, right? Or she may not know why she felt that there was an issue there that she should go take her purse. But implicit bias and explicit, racism, they're connected, right? Because they may align, but in some cases they don't align. We have cases where folks have implicit biases against their own group, right? So I, as a Black man, because of the experiences I've had, because of the media, I might have implicit biases against Blacks,
Okay.
So when you have situations like, for example, with the police department, where they're saying, well, how could you accuse this officer of being racist when he's black and the person that he dealt with was black, or the person he shot was black? Well, they might not harbor any explicit, feelings toward blacks or anybody else, but there might be implicit biases that they're not even aware of.
So is it safe to say that sometimes this implicit bias is what is making our world crazy right now, where we have these deep embedded ideas or that we don't even know that we have, and we see something. And I mean, even I do it. The other day I had to catch myself because I saw a guy walk by, and he walked kind of weird. His pants were hanging down, and I was like, and the first thing I said out loud was, "Wait, okay, I'm not going to let my implicit bias take over right now. I'm going to say that this is just an ordinary person walking down the street."
Right. Right. It happens, and it happens to all of us, and we can control it when we're thinking about it. So if you've gone, we have certain things that we can do that are easy, like they say, riding a bike. But when you get into the car, we get so comfortable. At first, when we start driving, everything's just, we're aware of everything. We're looking around. And then after a while, you're driving, you've got the phone here, you're doing everything else, and you're just so comfortable because everything's automatic, it's automated. With implicit bias, you actually have to think about it and make sure that you're not succumbing to the feelings that you have. For example, when I was growing up, I was afraid of dogs. I got hit by a car running away from a dog. Well, after I got hit by that car, in my mind, when I saw a dog, I still felt the rush, right? I still felt the amygdala response of fight, flight, or freeze. But my mind would say, nope, either you fight that dog or you go get hit by a car. It was always connected. So I was able to control how I responded to that reaction. I would go, nope, and I would stay put and deal with the dog. And of course, dog owners know when the dog sees that, they're not going to just keep running after you and that sort of thing. But when you run, they're going to react off of that. So the bias thing, you have to keep at it. It's a matter of having training and continuing that having the anti-bias ideas in the forefront of your mind.
Now, I tried to take the bias test for Harvard today. I actually physically tried to take it, and I was biased towards it because it was annoying to me. And I couldn't tell you if I was implicitly biased or not, because I got to level 7 and I was like, I can't do this anymore. It was really taxing on my brain because I kept getting things wrong. And I thought there was no right or wrong answer, but apparently there are wrong answers in this test.
Well, so you came out and you weren't able to get your biases?
I gave up. I tried.
I applaud you for trying.
Huh?
I applaud you for trying.
I was biased towards the implicit bias study. I can't do this.
You don't like the study.
I can try it again. I mean, but you said that there's kind of a wormhole of this whole thing that you can get into it, but you said, do you really want to get deep into it? So tell me the deep part.
Okay, so this started for me years and years ago, and what it was it put a sort of name to things that I had felt. So,
okay.
For example, there were times when in the office I would say something, and it almost seemed like I wasn't being heard. There were times when I deal with fellow employees, right, coworkers, and certain ones would say to me, well, you look angry today, and I'm in a great mood, not feeling angry at all, And so these things happened, and I would wonder why it was happening, that sort of thing. And then I went to a Lori Friedel over at University of Florida. She does this fair and impartial policing training, and I went to the train the trainer course, and it just sort of blew my mind. It was like Matrix, where you which pill are you going to take? Which one do you want to take? And once you see it, then you can't not see it. Like, you see it everywhere. You realize that this officer involved shooting here. Well, that is not necessarily Racist, that's somebody that was scared. They really were scared, but why were they scared? That's what we have to think about. Where did that come from? Was it reasonable? But it's everywhere. It's in the medical industry. There's
bias in the medical industry.
Bias, right? Doctors. They said doctors. A study that shows that doctors that score high in implicit bias are less likely to prescribe clot-busting drugs to Black patients rather than white.
So this implicit bias is not just law enforcement. It's everyday life. It's doctors. Even if someone has an accent, can your implicit bias be towards that accent as well?
Well, so this is something that we see in Hollywood and the cartoons, right? You ever see The Lion King?
Yes.
Okay, so what does Mufasa sound like? Mufasa sounds pretty much like straightforward, like Midwest American.
Sounds like James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones. They're in Africa, right?
Yes.
What does Rafiki sound like? Rafiki's the little monkey that had the stick that held up Simba. That what I mean. And so he's got this another accent, right? Okay. And then you got Scar, who's the smart, right? Deep voice, but he's got an English accent. And he actually says in the movie, he says, while Mufasa got the physical traits, I was blessed with the smarts. So we use these things to actually guide what reputation is gonna, this cartoon character is gonna have. So we see the smart one, we see the physically strong one, and then if you look at the hyenas, which were they were sort of the bad guys, right? Do you know who they were played by?
Who?
So you got Ed. I forget the other two. Not Nala. Ed. Forget what their names were, but they were kind of like the silly. One was Whoopi Goldberg.
Okay.
The other one was Cheech Marin from Cheech and Chong.
Cheech and Chong.
Right. So these sort of degenerates, that's who they were played by.
Okay.
And those accents were that sort of fitting with those stereotypes.
I got into it
when we had like Cold War stuff. The evil people had the Russian accents, so they change. It changes over time.
So, question was asked: how early in life can implicit bias start? Is it something you're born with, or does it something you learn? If you were born in the woods and you never saw people, and all of a sudden you see somebody, will you have that implicit bias if you've never seen someone, or if it's something that you learn from as you grow up?
Then you'd be like Archie Bunker. You just hate everybody. No.
See, hold on for a second. So you mentioned Archie Bunker, and there's some people here who've never heard of Archie Bunker. You know who Archie Bunker is?
I'm aging myself now.
Yeah, you are.
All in the Family. He's.
I've never seen that show before. I'm young.
No, I don't believe that for a minute. It was an old show where Archie Bunker was one of the main characters, and he pretty much was racist, sexist. He was every ist there is, and he just sort of didn't like everybody, No, there's studies that show kids as young as infants and especially 5 years old in school that show these signs of bias. There's studies that actually show the kids picking dolls, and they obviously pick the white dolls. Well, the Black kids do the same thing. They pick the white dolls.
Okay.
They ask the children which doll is pretty, and they pick the white doll. Which doll is ugly? They pick the Black doll. Which one is dangerous, or and so these biases happen to us, and this is why it's so important to understand that bias is different from, like, a biased person is different from a racist person.
Okay, there's a difference. We lost him. So when he comes back, so apparently there's a difference, and he keeps dropping out. Social media, the whole thing is crazy. This whole thing with internet is never promised. So we're going to bring him back in a second, and there he is. You got to pay your cable bill, homie.
No, I need to connect to the public Wi-Fi or something.
Something. We got to get you some. You must have Infinity.
Yeah. Well, I won't mention who it is, but it rhymes with Finity, something like that.
I won't say it, but it rhymes with 50. Okay.
Yeah, it rhymes with. These biases happen based on, right? They're connected to what we see, right? And so these biases can be passed down to children from parents. So the case of the mom walking down the street with the baby, and she sees a guy in a wheelchair, or she sees, a black guy, and like the lady that ran over to her purse when she saw you, she tightens up on her child, she tightens that purse up. That child feels that. So that child sees that black guy walking by, and then mommy tightens up. Now that child actually has that physical amygdala reaction when they see someone that looks the same as well. They don't know why. So they react, but they have no idea why they're reacting that way. And so when we look at this society and we say, okay, we Voting Rights Act was what, 1965?
Right.
And when you look at the way that we have this sort of, we copycat each other, right?
Okay.
It's something that we have to realize this stuff is not back in the day, years and years ago, history, slavery is over with, and that's great. But when you look at the fact that our parents actually saw this stuff, my mom was born in 1950. So 1965, 15 years old, she saw this stuff.
Okay.
So now things are sort of changing, but at the same time, the children of those folks that were at the Jerome Pettis Bridge when Martin Luther King Jr. is going over to take people to vote and that sort of thing, those children are walking around today, and they may harbor biases that they don't even know about, or they don't even know why they have. So when you talk to them and you say, hey, do you have a problem with black people, whoever, they'll say, well, no, I don't. I was raised better than that. Well, but then when it comes to them actually pressing for civil rights for others, it's harder for them to do. They don't see it the same way, and they don't know why.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is give people a chance to, we're not going to have people come on like we normally do. We're going to have them, if they have a question, we'll have them type the question out and I'll read it out to them and I'll post the question up here. But if they have a question, but producer Jace, who's been watching this whole thing, says that he said he's from New York and always had been told my New York accent is aggressive. And so do you think that your aggressive, your accent can push towards implicit bias?
Absolutely. So what do you see on TV, right? And the media pushes a lot of this stuff. And there was a term that we coined, a friend of mine, Bill Baker over at my job there. We were talking about this, and we said that it really should be, instead of systemic racism, it should be systemic bias, because back in the day there were rules and regulations for what blacks could and couldn't do, right? But now the rules are set to be fair, but then there's still things that are happening in terms of enforcing those rules and how they're enforced and that sort of thing that that make it so that it's actually not fair. So these things with accents, for example, what do you see on TV? You see, get out of here, I'm trying to move here. You hear that New York accent, and then that aggressiveness that goes along with it. Then you hear the accent without the aggressiveness, and you, in your brain, connect that aggressiveness to it. So
what can we as parents do? And this is from producer Jace. What is one thing we as parents can do to start changing how our kids see other people? I mean, what can we do to limit our children having implicit bias, which we know is subconscious, but whatever you do subconscious, you can control. I mean, if you subconsciously have to smoke cigarettes, you know that you want to smoke a cigarette, but you can find a way to stop doing it, and you can change your thought pattern. How can parents change their kids?
Well, so it's exposure. The first thing is that if we don't have any other stories when it has to do with a particular group, I say blacks just because I do a lot of research on implicit bias against blacks, right? But it could be anything. You have a particular bias against a certain group. typically it's because you don't have a lot of information on that group. You don't know that group. And so you only, your subconscious brain kind of goes right to what you've seen on TV or what it's already connected for that group itself. Right?
So I'm going to say this, and before you go deeper into this, is that we, I'm going backwards because you said that the media pushes this stuff. I'm going to, as part of the media, I'm going to defend the media and say we do not push the stuff. However, it is repetitive once it's put out there. So I had to correct you on that whole media. We don't actually push anything. We talk about it unless you go to certain channels and maybe.
Like today, what's going on?
Huh?
Like today, what's going on today, and the Capitol.
See, don't get me started because if that was a bunch of, never mind. Let me get me started. If it wasn't us, I don't think they would have gotten that close to the building. Just my opinion, but I don't think we would have made it that close.
Yeah.
You
see how we're tippy-toeing over this, right? Everyone's being careful. Why? I mean, let's call a spade, right? If we say, if it were Black Lives Matter, if it was a group of Black folks, could they have gotten? Is that what you're saying? Why is it that it's scary to say that? Why do I feel concerned over saying something like that?
Well, because here's why. Because we are in the culture society of the world we live in right now. And if you say the wrong thing, and at one point in life before it was politically incorrect to say the wrong thing because you became culture and cancel culture. And they would go against you and have people try to tell you don't support this business. Even if you did nothing wrong, because someone made here's a good example. This happened to me. And this is a long time ago. I was in an In-N-Out burger place. And I saw a family eating In-N-Out burger with chopsticks. I thought it was the coolest thing in the entire world to see that. I thought it was cool. I was like, man, this is great. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And I wrote family eating chopsticks. And all of a sudden there was a change.org thing put out about me saying that I was being racist. And I asked, well, why would you think I'm being racist? It almost ruined my whole vacation because it was being the change.org was like, you need to apologize. And I asked, well, why do I need to apologize? And you know what they said? It wasn't because of anything I said. They said, well, you do a segment called People Behaving Badly. So therefore, anything you say means that they are behaving badly. So that was why they created a whole change.org against me because of the title of the show I did was enough for them to take that conclusion and draw it into being negative and then make a change.org. It didn't go anywhere. The change.org didn't. I mean, it really was. It was irrelevant that they made this up, but they ran with it. And it wasn't Black people that did this, and it wasn't even Asian people that did this because they were like, "Hey, we know what you were trying to say." Mm-hmm. It was a group of white people who decided that I was being racist, and they decided they wanted to cancel me at that particular moment.
And that idea is them sort of saving that group,
right?
I think that I go into all these studies, right? There's so many studies that talk about what we're talking about, but again, to go through the studies, it takes obviously it takes time. One of the media study, a 2000 study showed that Blacks were overrepresented as perpetrators of violent crime and underrepresented as victims or actual heroes. Now, this is comparing what's happening in the news with what's actually happening in society, police departments and police reports and that sort of thing. So when I say that media is sort of pushing it, I don't think, and this is where we talk about whether it's implicit, whether it's systemic racism versus, systemic bias, is because I don't think that there's a lot of news outlets or, media outlets that are purposely trying to make Black people look bad or, any group look any certain way. But it's something that their implicit selves, right, that subconscious, they see that and it's like, that's newsworthy.
Now that makes sense because I've argued about this for years. And one of the things I used to watch and watching the news was very simple. So if you were committed a crime and you were black, you were called black. That if it was a black guy robbed the store, right? And it's changed a lot over the years. It's gotten better. But then if you did something and you were good, it was an African American was just appointed to supervisor for the first time ever. So if you did something good, you were African American.
Right.
But if you did something bad, you were black. And so I noticed this working in the news business, and I told some of my people, I said, "Look, we're doing this, and we don't know where it's subconscious,
right?
That we're projecting negativity by saying black, and so but if you say African American, then it's okay." Now, here's where it gets funny with me, because I met a police officer who worked for, I believe it was Mountain View Police Department, and I could be mistaken. They'll probably call me up and say I got it wrong, but he is a white guy with green eyes, born and raised in South Africa, but now he is a U.S. citizen. So I tweeted one day a picture of him, and I said, "I'm no longer calling myself an African American because this guy here is clearly an African American."
Right. Well, and that's another conversation that I have with some folks about this idea of being of having past, slavery affect people now, because they go, "Well, I didn't own any slaves, and I don't even know if my family owned any slaves." Okay, but for us, there's a difference, because my last name is Ruffin. But is it? I asked a friend of mine, "So what country am I from?" I mean, if other people were slaves, right? We talk about, the Irish were slaves and all the, okay, well then what country are they from? Ireland. What country am I from? Africa. Africa's not a country. Try again. What language did I originally speak? No idea. Well, what about my name? What was my name? There's so many things that are missing. So we say African American, how many have actually been to Africa and seen it's quite different.
Yeah. Well, I did the DNA test, and despite all the people telling me you should never do it, and apparently I'm Irish. So I think I have the lucky part is the Irish part, and then then I have Bantu, and now all of a sudden all these people are like sending me messages going, "We're related," and I'm like, "Okay, no, I didn't know we're related, but no one I know that I'm related to is famous." I'm waiting for somebody like Bill. We're related.
Well, that explains. So this is actually the screen, right? I thought this was white. It's red.
No, it's white.
Oh,
what are you trying to say?
I thought, the Irish. I thought
Irish green. St. Patty's Day, baby.
Yeah, it's
so here's a question.
Huh?
So the podcast name is Reasons Why Aliens Would Never Invade Earth. So of course the tie-in there is, if aliens invaded Earth, would there be an implicit bias towards them if they turn out to be nice people?
No, I think it would start off with them being animals. Then they have to go through being a 3/5 of a person, and then they're going to have to go through separate but equal. And then there's going to be some Jim Crow, the Jim Crow, and then eventually it won't be so okay to say negative things about the aliens, and then that'll press everything down. Then they'll go through a time where there's just sort of like this hidden implicit bias against them.
So 200 years worth.
And then at a certain point, one of them will be brutally killed, and then next thing you know, people will say, "Well, you know what? Maybe they are being treated differently," and then they'll be accepted. I think that implicit bias is the final frontier when it comes to racism and equality. So I think the aliens will have to go through that whole process. We'll help them.
200 years.
I don't know, because alien years are different than our years. It might be 5 minutes for them. It might be 8,000 years for them. I don't know.
So basically, they could probably be here and be assimilated right away, and then we'll still be on the back looking in.
I mean, maybe it depends on what color the aliens are. Are they actually green?
Well, I don't know. We only see on TV, and the funny thing about television is that a lot of our stuff nowadays is based on what we've seen on TV. Right. Like the vaccine, we're all thinking about zombies and eating people's brains. And if that had never been on TV, now that's a different form of media, so it's not news media. It's the media is anything that projects towards you.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have projection that, a vaccine will give us all, we become zombies and start eating brains. Some people believe that the vaccine, it puts a microchip in you and they can track you. And there are people who believe this stuff. I'm not saying it's true. I mean, I got into an argument with an actor once over the sky and the chemtrails.
Oh,
which I can never. He disowned me as a friend because I didn't believe in chemtrails, and this was 20 years ago.
That wasn't your friend.
Well, apparently not.
And how dare you question his beliefs? That brings me to another thing is that there's a book Isabel Wilkerson Cast. In fact, I have it here. This Cast, great book. I want to mention it because what she does is she connects our system with blacks, whites, other races, right, with the caste system in India. But she does, it's sort of a play on words as well, because what is a caste, like the one that kind of goes on your arm without the E? What is that designed to do? It's designed to keep things in place. If you're in a play, you have a cast. You have a group of people that are the actors. Each actor has to play their role. And it's brilliant the way she lays this out. But the idea is that we all have a role to play. If you look like this, you're supposed to know this, you're supposed to do that, you're supposed to play your particular role. When you don't, the people in the play, the others in the play, will straighten you out and put you back in your place. If you continue to do that, they'll kick you out of the play.
Okay.
And so when I look at the idea of bias and dealing with with different groups and whites and blacks together, and you look at this sort of caste system that we have in the U.S., it's really compelling, because if you step out of your role as a black person, even if you're the supervisor, even if you're the boss, and you step out of your role as a black person and question a white person, and this is not obviously all the time, but I'm just saying that I've seen this happen to where there's this sort of how could you do that? How could you, how dare you question me? I'm right. I know what I'm talking about. And it's hard for us. I know what I'm talking about. I've studied this. I'm in a position to where it's my job to deal with these things. And then we get questioned, and you just get, it can make you real tired.
So someone asked the question, what would aliens report back about American society, how the American society operates? What do you think they would say right now if they were to look at us and go, okay, this is what the Earth looks like. That's our blue planet.
I think they would still see the kind of separation that we had, back during Jim Crow. There would still be, if you look at the neighborhoods, for example, Oakland, as much as Oakland is diverse, when you actually go into the neighborhoods, you'll see these complete, areas where it's all segregated. The schools are segregated, the neighborhoods are segregated, that sort of thing. So I think that given the amount of time we've been free in this country and the amount of time that we haven't, we're making progress. It doesn't look like it. It's painful and everything, but we're actually making progress. It's not as fast as we'd like. And I agree with the producer. They would say these Earthlings are crazy.
I think we're crazy, and I'm from this planet.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole job is to look for the shenanigans of the world, and I have to look at it with a mindset that what's right and what's wrong. And for me, and what people don't realize is that when I do those segments, that's not a snapshot of a week. That's not a snapshot of a month. That's a snapshot of 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's the bad behavior I find in a 4-hour period of time. And if you think about that, if I can find that much in just 4 hours, that's a snapshot of what else is going on around me. Now, is it like that everywhere? I'm going to say probably not.
Well, that's the thing. So hopefully, in this analogy of the aliens, they don't do what a lot of us do. What we do is we look at, for example, one community will look at the police and say, look at those cops in San Francisco that said all those horrible things about Black people and, these texts and look at these criminals, that sort of thing, and use that to say that the entire group is that way. And so then Black Lives Matter and do the same thing and say, well, look at these people that said they should kill all cops and that sort of thing. And that must be the whole group. There's outliers in every group. And we can't take that small group that's on the extreme and use it to represent the entire group. We have to understand that Black Lives Matter is way bigger than George Floyd and, and these particular situations. It's about the years of oppression. And Blue Lives Matter, that's, now the thin blue line, that's something different. That's a pride in police work and the protection that police officers offer the community. And so you can't take that and make it into a criminal thing or an anti-Black thing.
So we got into a thing now where you can make anything whatever you want it to be in your mind. So you can make the OK symbol as a racist symbol, which has been okay for 100 years. And all of a sudden now the OK symbol means racist.
Or alpha kappa psi, kappa alpha psi.
Yes. But all of a sudden, because someone says it's racist, and that whole thing of I'm going to make this what I want it to be, it goes back to the whole cancer culture, where if I decide that I'm going to make this bad, then I'm going to get all my friends to come. And I think personally, Twitter is the biggest bully that we have out here right now, because it's like dog pile on the rabbit, everybody jumps on one person if they don't like something, and you don't know what you're going to say that's going to trigger people to not like you. You can be defending someone and have every single intention in the world to be right, but if someone deems what you said wrong, then everything else is irrelevant, because dog pile on the rabbit mentality starts and they all start jumping on you. And then they take pride nowadays in saying, look at me, I got him to log off the internet, or I got him to block his account. And blocked accounts now are like a prize. If you can get someone to block you from their account, you post that. Look, he blocked me. I'm guilty of doing that. You're probably guilty of doing that.
Well, I think that's that cultural compliance where we follow the group rather than looking into things in a critical way. My idea of cultural current is that the current's going one way. You're in the same boat as everyone else. And if you're not rowing towards equality, if you say, I don't see color, or I don't, then you're letting it go towards the culture, whatever that direction is. And so you're complicit in the results. So looking into things further and not just saying, well, let's see, John voted, for Biden and he's a Democrat, and Sally voted for Trump and she's a Republican, then they must hate each other. I think the greatest strength of this country right now, especially with all that's going on that's crazy, is that we can have the conversation. We can have the conversation. We can sit and argue and talk about it and analyze it. Whereas in a lot of other places, you can't even do that.
Well,
so
now it's
the beauty of this country.
Yeah, now we've gotten to the point now, if you disagree with someone politically, they'll cut your head off.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that way. It should be able to have open dialogue and to agree and to disagree.
Right. And that's the thing. So, and that's where we get into, the idea of having the diversity and we're going to bring in more diversity into this organization. That's great, as long as you also include inclusion, because inclusion is the power behind diversity. And if we can actually include the opinions of others and mix that up, now we've got power. Now we're actually doing something. But if we just bring in different groups and bring in that diversity without actually fostering that culture of inclusion, then it's really for naught. It's not going to make a difference. In fact, it's going to make more conflict than anything else, because they're not going to be able to
so producer Jace Root, is implied bias related to occupation as well, or is it mostly used for race? And I can answer that question. You tell me if I'm wrong. I believe that it's actually for both. Now, here's implied bias for business. I go for a job. My name is, I don't know, Mohammed something, and you see the resume, and you go, whoa, wait a minute. Your implied bias is that this person has a black sounding name. And so, but then you have over here, Tracy White, and her name doesn't sound black. So then you take his and throw it away because you're not even going to look at it because you already assumed in your mind that this person is not going to be a good candidate. So in my opinion, that could be considered implied bias or it could be considered implicit bias. I think right there, it kind of borders both between the two.
So there's actually research that is exactly what you're talking about. They sent out resumes. These resumes all had the same qualifications, same experience and background, but the only thing they changed was the names, and they made some names sound more traditionally black, and then some, very what you would assume would be white sounding names, and there was a 50% difference in callbacks for those resumes. The black sounding names got 50% fewer callbacks. Does that mean that the hiring managers were looking at it and saying, oh, that sounds like a black name? I don't think so. Or were they looking at it and maybe they don't even consciously notice that it's a black sounding name, but they realize it. They're reading the resume and they may actually see less qualifications because of their implicit biases, and they don't know it. That's why the idea of systemic, bias rather than systemic racism is actually a strong term.
So here's something that that I think about, and this happens, and we're going to wrap up pretty soon because we're getting close to the hour mark. But do you know that there's another form of implied bias that people black people experience it? I've experienced it. You go look for a house. And you go and you walk into the house, you look around, and they ask you something like, well, have you already been pre-certified? Have you already been pre-approved for a house?
Right.
And if you say no, they will ignore you because it's like, well, we don't think you have money, so therefore you haven't been pre-approved, so you shouldn't be here. Now, we had this happen in Apache Junction. We were looking around at homes. Walk in, the house was about $1 million home. It's a beautiful house, way out in far Apache Junction. And the realtor said to us, he says, oh, this house is already pretty much sold. There's no reason why, don't worry about it. House, And so I said, oh, that's too bad. So I gave him a business card. And then I said, well, thank you. Have a good day. About an hour later, I guess he must have researched who I was. He called me and says, it's not sold yet. We if you want to make an offer, we'll entertain an offer. But before you knew who I was, you already told me the house was sold.
Right.
There's no reason to look here. But then when you research who I was, then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. Maybe I prejudged. Well, that's implicit bias.
Yeah. Well, and you can see how that can create an actual, segregation in housing, right? I mean, that kind of behavior over and over again. One of the things that I think what producer was saying is that we see, like in that situation, the person would actually, with a black person, they would ask right away, hey, have you been pre-approved? But with someone that they think is already pre-approved, they wouldn't even ask that question. They would assume right away that they were, and then they just show them the house. The other types of biases is like, we have to realize, so as a black person, when I'm in public and I deal with an officer, I have to recognize that I have my own biases about the person I'm dealing with. So I might see this person and think right away that they're going to have an issue with me, and that's my bias against them. So as an officer, when I deal with people, I have to remember that they may think just because I'm an officer, I'm going to think of them a certain way because of their own experiences. So these biases are going back and forth. They're going all around.
Your mind's just going crazy with biases.
Right.
So there's a comment from Jason. I guess we got his question wrong. So I'll pop it up here so we can both see it. So he means we see cops assume they are bad people and doctors were good. But a person that doesn't match their bias, are there also biases?
So a person that doesn't match their bias. So we see a cop and assume that they're bad. Some people do, and that's a bias, right? I mean, remember, it's not something that's going to be explicit, right? If you can tell me, oh, you know what, I don't like cops, then that's a prejudice. That's not just a bias. That's something that you know, right? But if you go, I don't have a problem with cops. If a cop comes around, doesn't matter. But then they see a cop and they're like, oh crap, that sort of thing. They don't realize where it comes from. That's implicit. Remember, this is all coming from your subconscious brain.
Okay.
It's not coming from the conscious brain. So when you come into a situation that's like rapidly evolving, an emergency situation where your amygdala, your lizard brain is taking over, then you take your oar out of the water and your whole behavior goes toward the cultural current. It goes towards whatever that culture that you're in has taught you to do, how to respond. And so that's when those implicit biases come in. It's not when you're able to slow things down and think about it, which is the way that you combat implicit bias, is to slow it down and then react to a situation based on knowledge of that situation, not just what you've connected from the past.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming here to talk about this. This is, again, a hot button issue. And for those who just joined us, this is Quincy Ruffin. He's an expert on, he also wrote a book about Black Lives Matter and how that made a difference, but that's a whole different subject.
Yeah, no, it was an article and it was just talking about Black Lives Matter. And like I said, that it's the extreme portions of it, right? You can't say that Black Lives Matter as a group is represented by this small group that are extreme. Just like you can't do the same thing with the police officers and say this particular group represents the whole group. There's outliers in every group. And so we have to realize what it really means.
So, okay. So as we try to wrap this up, you actually have a way people can look at what you've written. And I should have had it typed in and I didn't. So I'm a failure for that right now. But you want to tell people what it is and how they can find you?
Yeah, take a look at Unmasking the Biosphere. So you've heard of biosphere, it's BIASPHERE, unmaskingthebiosphere.com. On there, there's actually some resources for some of the writing that I've done. And I also do a lot of workshops and public speaking. So that's sort of, my buddy Don says I geek out on this stuff. It's real interesting. And there's so much more, right? We can only cover so much in an hour. But
you know what though? I mean, you're the premier of Reason Why Aliens Will Never Invade Earth. And again, it's a silly name for serious subjects, because I firmly believe that somewhere in the galaxy, there is a billboard that is telling all the aliens to avoid the big blue planet because we are. And so I'm going to have Diane, she's here. I'm going to have her type in the name of the one more time so we can send up for everybody, because I just got a boo from Gordon Wong saying that boo and that moderator behaving badly. But, I had so much going on today. Today has been an extraordinary day. but Quincy, I do thank you for taking time to come on here. This will be on Spotify later, but we want to thank people from Facebook, from Twitter, from YouTube, and from I almost said Twix. I must be hungry. From Twitter, logging in and watching. Because, this is the beginning of something, and we hope to do more of these. And when this is done, I just want to say thank you, because you brought some very mindful discussion out, which, again, this will reverb over the years, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll come back and say we've made changes. So, and don't forget the new streaming platform, Twix. Yes.
Twix, yeah. Well, hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate this. This is something that I think is extremely important. When we talk about this assembly bill and how things are being taken, I think it's important. Unmasking the Biosphere. It's BIASPHERE.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
She spelled it wrong. See, that was one of my producers got it wrong. So we'll just go to the Twix one because that's pretty funny. .com.
Biosphere. There it is. Unmasking the Biosphere. And again, if you have questions or comments, feel free, go on the site. You can comment. You can email me on the site, and I actually do answer up when I can. And I actually enjoy looking up more information. So we can only cover so much, but thank you. I appreciate this.
I don't know that before we got online, your internet was like crap. We couldn't even.
I know. And now it's good. So I didn't realize Stan Roberts was also a tech support phenom.
Yeah, I got I got a Volkswagen back there with the little black and white Volkswagen. I just tell you turn off your router and turn it back on again.
Fix
But I
it.
do appreciate you being the first guest. And again, you can look for us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. We'll have it up there later. But thank you again, and I appreciate you. And also Jace says that Jace took credit. He says that he's the phenomenon that he is. So
well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate that.
Hey, you notice I changed it, took the clock down, right? I put up the award I got because I want anybody to look at the clock and go, "This is taking forever."
Too slow.
So yeah, I'm gonna go so I'm gonna have to get Twix to be like a advertisement now.
Twix will be notified. Twix will be notified. Right. I'm gonna go have a Twix right now in your honor.
All right, good night.
All right, take care.
Hey everybody, thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and we'll have something again, hopefully next Wednesday. One of my guests is trying to drop out, but we'll see. Bye.